Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aaron Knoll, and welcome back once again to another edition of the Movie Battleground. As we are here slowly sort of working our way back into this here. Here we have the first of two matchups. I hope it's the first of two in terms of upload. Otherwise, I fucked that up, didn't I? The first of two matchups that's sort of a holdover from last year. We set these up last year to be at the end of the season. But we had some delays and other things that sort of kicked it back and pushed it into 2023. So these guys have had a bit of time to sit with the questions, maybe get some extra work in. I say maybe, it's Christmas. I don't expect them to do fucking anything, but maybe they got something in, and maybe it'll help them out here in today's match. So let's go ahead and jump into this one. It is Tyler Burch versus Ryan Payne. Introducing up first, coming in with a record of 1 win, 1 defeat. He is the Caramel Mountain, Ryan Payne. Ryan, welcome back to the Movie Battleground. How are you doing, sir?
Well, I mean, on any other day, I'd say I'm doing great, but depending on when this comes out, if not, I'm just working my way through battling off of a cold. But either way, I'm still looking forward to this. I mean, honestly, I got like a lot of flashcards around here with so many notes. I kind of want to clean some of the clutter off my desk, so I'm looking forward to doing this.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's been a long time coming. Obviously, you're back. This is your second matchup. Your first one against Alex ended in a loss. Then you had that match against Dean.
Yes.
And there's been a bit of a layoff in between. So now with that you have 1 loss, you have 1 win. You've experienced both sides of it. What do you feel you can sort of take into the matchup from that?
Well, hopefully from my 2 matches, including the exhibitions I've done, what I've taken away is to really try to remain more on point with my argument. I mean, it can't be helped if I drag off a little bit, but what I'm trying to take away from this is to spend more time like really emphasizing my point and really try to work on less talking about mine, trying to find a healthy balance, try to focus less on talking about my subject and focus more on my opponents, to really find a good point in the argument to where there's more positives on mine and I've taken away most of the negatives from it.
Absolutely. That's a great thing to work on, especially in debate. It's all about that balance, So we'll go ahead and put you in the back. And excuse me for one. Bring in your opponent, coming in with a record of 2 wins, 2 defeats with 1 knockout. He is Tyler Burch. Tyler, same thing, man. It's been a bit of a layoff for you since last year. Missing out on the tournament, but you got a win to put you back up in the higher standings. So you come in off the back of that win. How are you feeling coming into this?
I'm feeling all right. I'm definitely this will be the most interesting one for me, just because a lot of the questions are things that I was not very familiar with. So I had to kind of familiarize myself, which actually, was interesting kind of getting to learn more about things that, movies and stuff that I'm not too familiar with. But it'll be interesting to see how that translates into to the actual debate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the few interesting byproducts of this. Sometimes you're forced to have to learn about something you may not have known, and maybe you find something you enjoy, maybe you don't, and maybe that helps. But yeah, it's always an interesting one. So, like I said, you're coming in off the back of getting your second win. I believe that was your knockout victory as well that you picked up. So does that help you feel better coming into this? Now you've gotten a couple of losses out of the way and you're back on the winning table, or is it just kind of another matchup?
Honestly, just kind of another matchup. I mean, every person is different. Every question is different. So it's as much as you want to be like, oh yeah, I'm doing so well in this. You have to take every matchup as it comes and work hard on it. And so I try not to. It's nice to get momentum. It's nice to have the knockout and everything. But I also wanted to make sure that I took this as seriously as I could.
Absolutely. So we'll go ahead and bring Ryan in, and we will go ahead and jump into this matchup because Movie Battleground is a game that is a best of 5 rounds. It is the first 3 points wins the match. Each round of debate is worth 1 point. If a competitor happens to pick up the first 3 points in a row, that will be a victory by knockout. And if at the end of 4 rounds it is a 2-2 tie, we do have a blind round question ready to go for you guys. Excuse me again. In terms of the actual debates themselves, the competitors have had the questions. They've had as much time as we can give to prep. They will get 60 seconds to open, followed by 2 minutes to expand and explain. There will be a 4-minute open discussion, and then a 60-second closing argument for them to wrap up their points. Following that, backstage, we have 3 judges in the form of Kerry Webb, Jonathan Peck, and Henry Sanchez. They will join us on screen, at which point they will make a deliberation based off of your guys' arguments. With all that said, are you ready to go?
Yeah.
Yeah, all good.
So we'll go ahead and jump into this. And this first question, we are discussing a legendary veteran of the industry, none other than Mr. Denzel Washington, who has been in many a film.
Yeah, no worries.
It's a lot less smooth this way, isn't it? He has been in many a film, from some of the biggest dramas over the last 20, 30 years to some of the best action films. He has made a habit of diversifying his career, and he's also made a lot of connections in the industry. And so the question that we pose these guys is, what is the best director pairing with Denzel Washington of the directors listed? And we gave them a list of 8 directors. Those directors include Jonathan Demme, Carl Franklin, Antoine Fuqua, Norman Jewison, Spike Lee, Tony Scott, Denzel Washington himself, and Edward Zwick, who are the 8 directors in his career that he has worked with more than once. I'm glad he's worked with himself more than once. That would be a problem. But these are the 8 directors that were given to our competitors. They were each asked to pick one as the best pairing. So obviously every single film that they've done together is on the table, but keep in mind, judges, they don't necessarily have to mention everyone. How they frame their argument was their choice to frame, but they do have every film that they would have made together on the table to pick. So with that said, Tyler, because you do have the better record, you were deemed the favorite. You chose to go first on questions 1 and 3. Ryan, you'll go first on 2 and 4. And before we go go ahead and get into this. Similar to some of the other matches that will be airing around this time, because I am still recovering from having COVID. I have a very bad cough, as you guys have seen so far already. Henry, I'm going to bring him in, is going to be serving as the voice of reason, so to speak, in between rounds. Wow, that's the worst way I could have worded that. Make him feel good about himself right before a match. He will be serving as the voice for the competitors in between the rounds. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the timer in, and I will hand it over to you both, Tyler, and to you, Henry. Time starts when you begin speaking, Tyler.
So when I was thinking about Denzel Washington working with a director, it was definitely a difficult choice trying to decide between which one, this one, that one. There were so many that he's worked with in the past and kind of what that looks like. But in the end, I took someone that I was really thinking about a career, how like the length of a career and everything that's inside of it. And one of the things I was thinking about was his pairing with Tony Scott. More unconventional, a more unconventional pick, just because of the fact that his movies may not be as well known. But I was thinking about how many times that they worked together and how long it was, from Crimson Tide, which was in 1995, to Unstoppable 2010. Honestly, it could have gone on longer, but through that time we get to see a really interesting transition for Denzel's career as he keeps progressing through, and honestly, as time progresses.
And time, Ryan, when you begin speaking, you have 1 minute.
I'd say in a way, just like Tyler, I too looked at Denzel's filmography and also the directors he's worked with. And yeah, while of all the choices, I'll be honest, there is no bad pick between all the directors there, because whoever Denzel works with, he always gets great performances out of. But I decided to pick one director that was able to at least not elevate Denzel, but help bring Denzel to the recognition that apparently not many people were aware of, and that is Antoine Fuqua. And the reason why I say that is maybe because Antoine Fuqua was the director that directed Training Day that brought Denzel that Oscar. Now, I know it's going to be brought up later on, and it is worthy to note that Denzel deserved an Oscar way before that film. But this felt to me like this was a good one because it was kind of, in a way, it's a non-essential role for Denzel to play. And the direction that him and Fuqua had together was great. And also they do reteam like many years later while Denzel's like in the twilight of his career to show that even though he may not be like on the rising way, but he's still proving that he can act.
And time. All right, we're going to bounce back over to Tyler for his 2-minute rebuttal when he begins speaking.
Yeah, I was thinking, when I talk about the span of a career, I think about, beginning and end. A big thing for that is always going to be the transition from the hotshot to the old guard. Kind of, same way like Lethal Weapon with Riggs and Murtaugh. And honestly, like when I think about beginning movie and last movie of working with a director, the reason why like Tony Scott stands out to me is because, Crimson Tide, he's the hotshot. He's the one that says, no, I'm not going to do this nuclear launch, even though you're telling me to as a superior officer. That's not, I believe what I believe in is what I think is right, and I'm going to follow through on that. And so we get that sense that he's committed. This is his way. It's not so much about the rules; it's about following your code. And then going through that, we get to go through and we see in the last film, Unstoppable, where he's the old guard. He's the veteran. He's about to be forced into early retirement. And he's got Chris Pine, who's, the hotshot rookie, and kind of how they interplay off of each other in that role reversal from what we'd seen from the beginning to the end. I thought it's really interesting. It really encapsulates kind of like how a career progresses as long as you want to continue growing. Which I thought was really interesting, and kind of also just the fact that and I mean, Denzel does this with a lot of different directors, but I thought it was really interesting about the different challenges that he has with working with Tony Scott. Not so much as like he's a hard director to work with, but more like the different roles that he plays. He's a military officer. He's a bodyguard hell-bent on finding his charge. He's a time traveling investigator. He's a subway control man, and so it's varied.
And time. Bounce over to Ryan. 2 minutes when you begin speaking.
One thing I wanted to elaborate on in the opening, when I say Denzel's career, when he wanted to prove that he can still act. Normally, for an actor, one of the longevity is that sooner or later, no matter like what my opponent did say, you become the hotshot. You're like the up and comer, the worst coming in, and then a certain point's going to happen where people are going to stop paying attention to you. And one thing especially happens, especially when you're that actor that wins that Academy Award, which Denzel did with Training Day. Now, thankfully for Denzel, it wasn't more something to where like it was a acclamation that like an achievement that encapsulates his career, but it was even more of a jump off point for him to just keep working. And kind of the funny thing is, yeah, he had multiple. Oh my, sorry, I'm just gonna drop that. Well, he ended up doing multiple work, but one thing I will say with Antoine Fuqua was, as a director, Fuqua likes to always work on character pieces because that's what makes his films very engaging. And seeing how Train Day is a character piece that put Denzel in a role that not many people would have actually seen him in, because before Train Day, he was Malcolm X, he was the Hurricane, he did a lot of stuff with Spike Lee, but then afterwards, you're seeing Denzel in roles to where he is more of the, not authoritarian, but the leader. Especially when they reteam later on, they reteam for the movie The Equalizer. And one thing I did like about this pairing between Fuqua and Denzel is that this pairing did something that Denzel never does in Hollywood. He never does sequels, which we got with The Equalizer 2, and what we're getting coming down the pike later with The Equalizer 3, where he's going to be reteaming with Dakota Fanning, who he first worked together with on a Tony Scott film, Man on Fire. So I thought that was kind of a very nice little note there to show that with Antoine Fuqua, there must be something that Denzel likes to work with him. And I'm going to end my time.
All right, 3, 2, 1. All right, 4-minute open debate when the first person begins speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting that you talked about like how it's all these different character pieces. One of the things that I really appreciate about my about working with Tony Scott is that with character pieces you always want to interact with different people, and one of the things about when you work with the same director over and over again is that you start seeing the same people. One of the things that I appreciated about with working with Tony Scott is that there was a lot of different individuals, a lot of different actors, actresses that he got to work with. It wasn't this same the same crew, just different movie, which I think was interesting because it pushes it pushes an actor to go to places that they're not usually used to, um, both in terms of story and just the character. And so I think it was really interesting that I got to work with people like Travolta, how we got to work with Paula Patton, Val Kilmer, obviously Dakota Fanning, like you said, Walken. I think it really opened up a lot of really interesting opportunities for Denzel.
That is a good point there. But I do Tony Scott, and I will say and many other directors Denzel work with. Tony Scott really has this. Tony, like with Fuqua, does have this thing to where they don't have to always direct Denzel, but to just let Denzel be Denzel, but also to guide him. But one thing I will say about Tony Scott, as much as I do love the earliest films they have together, like Crimson Tide and Man on Fire, some of the films they do afterwards, like Deja Vu and The Taking of Pelham 123, is it became more to where they're less where the spectacle of Tony Scott's directing kind of overshadows a little bit. Now Denzel, he still sticks out in Deja Vu, but unfortunately, it's the cinematography, the editing choices, and the Tony Scott directing style really overcapsulates a lot of that, and it definitely shows in 1, 2, 3. With Fuqua though, the only bad film, if you had to pick, what would be The Magnificent Seven, but then that's a film where Denzel is also playing something that's kind of out of his type casting. He's in that's the one movie where he plays where he's in a western and he plays a cowboy or a U.S. Marshal, but still at its core, the film is still a character piece to where while Denzel is sharing the screen with Ethan Hawke again and many more other actors, the story still stays focused onto the same plot. While with Tony Scott's films, sometimes they tend to go out of they tend to divert until by some miracle they start to tie back up together.
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, that's how stories go sometimes. You don't know where they're going to take you. I think there's always been an element of intrigue to Tony Scott's films, which I think was really interesting. But I mean, as far as like with Denzel, like I think the thing about him and Tony Scott is like, I mean, when you go and see, when you see Deja Vu, you're seeing it you said to yourself that like with Tony Scott, like it's mostly about Tony Scott's directors. I think with Deja Vu, Taking a Pelham 123 and Unstoppable, it's mostly going to be about Denzel's star power. It's about him. People are going to come they're interested in what's going on. They're interested in what Denzel's thinks is worth signing on to. And so him getting to do these films is kind of elevates like stories that not as many people would have taken time for. They go because they get to see, Denzel, and Denzel gets to reunite with somebody who was really pivotal for him in the beginning of his career and get to work on stories that, maybe aren't ones that get to see the light of day as much.
I would kind of almost say the same for Fuqua, because Fuqua was pivotal for Denzel's career, really giving him something new for the 2000s. Because after Training Day, he did a film almost every year in the 2000s before they reconnected for the Equalizer. Oh crap!
And time. All right. Pretty sure I remember Tyler goes first for his closing. 1 minute.
Is that it? It's not the reverse.
If did you open?
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, he's got it correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm first. Okay, sorry.
All good.
Okay, all right. Okay. For me, I mean, I think it's going to come down to, like I said, the beginning and the end, where a director takes an actor and an actor takes a director. We get to see an interesting pairing of these guys in Crimson Tide as like I said, Denzel plays a hotshot as he is he's a force, and we get to see as they continue on through this weird and interesting journey through some stories that you may not have normally seen Denzel, especially with some of the other films that he's been a part of. You get to see him take on to be reunited with an old friend, to be reunited with somebody who's known him since he was, very young as an actor, and see as he evolves as an actor until he becomes kind of, like I said, the old guard. He becomes the guy that is, he's, like I said, forced into early retirement, and kind of seeing that transition as an actor. You don't get to see that very often through a director and actor pairing, and I think that this really exemplifies that.
And time. All right, and then Ryan, 1 minute for your closing when you begin.
If there is one thing I do want to reiterate from what I said in the opening when it comes with Denzel Fuqua and Denzel pairing is that at least when it comes with the core of an actor and a director always like reteaming for the same project, it's not just the collaboration they find together, but there's always like these certain little moments or this chemistry they have that always makes them not just do better in performances, but helps them rejuvenate them when it comes to filmmaking. With Denzel, not after the Oscars, because normally it's always been known that when actors win Oscars, they're always known for two things: either going for the next Oscar or starting to play supporting roles. Denzel, he did not do that after Training Day. He kept on being a leading man, and whenever he was a supporting guy, if his name was attached to something, it was a project worth his time. And the fact that him and Fuqua took something like The Magnificent Seven and The Equalizer, and while these are old properties, they still found something to make magic out of, to where with The Equalizer, not only did Denzel come back for a sequel, he's doing a third one. And for as far as I know, this could be like his own little film franchise.
And time.
Damn.
All right.
Could ask for an extension.
All right. Well, now we're going to go over to the judges and see what happens.
Thank you, guys. Go ahead and put you in the back. Pulled you out just to reorganize it. All right. There are no fact checks because I don't feel like doing the extra talking. Carrie, I'm going to go up to you. Who gets your vote, and what was the main selling point?
Okay. I thought both competitors had really great arguments. It was a little hard to choose here. Sorry, Chad pressed. I don't know if you can hear that. Chad pressed the button at the wrong time. I think ultimately, I give the point to Ryan. I thought he just had. I really liked his points about and kind of bringing Denzel a little bit more of that recognition that he so deserved. And about sorry. Yeah, there are a few points. I'm sorry, I've lost track because of the noise, but there are a few points that I thought Ryan just did a really great job on.
Okay, right. So the first vote goes to Ryan. Peck, down to you, sir.
Okay then. Two very, very unique answers are right here for collaborations for Denzel Washington, and both very talented directors in their own right. And for me, the argument's sake about who put a better argument in closing is as to get my point to Tyler, because he pointed out the reasons to sort of, like he said, throughout the beginning, throughout the argument to the end, is sort of the beginning, the middle, and the end of the collaboration, how the works in the films, which I didn't feel like Ryan didn't have sort of like a sort of situation. You talk about some parts, but not a whole of it as a whole. So when Tyler, on the other hand, basically what he does for Tony Scott does. So I will give my point to Tyler.
Okay, so it is a 1-1, which means we'll go to you, Henry. Who gets your vote for the tiebreak?
So this one was interesting because not much talk about like the movies was done. It was more of like the actual relationship with each director. So it's not like how my mind had to like wrap around that of like how I wanted to go about it. And something said in the opening that really intrigued me and never was really like back down was Tyler's opening when he was talking about the versatility in the roles that he's done with Tony Scott. And it really clicked on that. And Ryan mentioned Training Day once, and then he got kind of like hammered home like the Equalizer, like the franchise bit, but didn't really get into like why that was like important. And so the Tyler's opening talking about the versatility and how that really stood out. So I'm gonna go with Tyler.
Okay, so the first point does go to Tyler. thank you guys so much. I'm going to go ahead and put you in the back as we will go ahead and bring the competitors back in for question number 2. And question number 2 is a viewer submitted question. So I want to say a shout out to everyone who has submitted questions. We're still not open for submission, but over the course of the season, we will slowly and surely be getting through all of them to use. And this one is brought to us by Austin Howell. And the question was, what is the best film to have won or a Worst Picture Golden Raspberry Award? Obviously, we are coming up into Oscar season. At the time of recording, we just had the Golden Globes pass. We just had the Critics' Choice Awards pass. The Oscar nominations are a week from today, actually. If anyone wants to do the math on when we're recording this, they are a week from today. And I know the BAFTA nominations are not long after that. So we are in the heat of award season, but the Razzies are the one we all care about, right? Because that lets you know, what was the shitty film that I missed this year? You know, like, what was the movie that, like, I'm glad I didn't see? But they're not always right. I mean, a lot of people would argue one of the better Twilight films, and Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2, was the one that won the Razzie. None of the others won a Razzie, but that one did. So there's always that question of, like, what, you know, are they correct? So what is the best film to have won the award? Ryan, we're going to go to you first. You will get the timer, and it'll start when you begin speaking.
Well, I'm just gonna go out and say my pick for the best film that won the best film. Honestly, this is a film that, of course, now knowing about this, I was surprised to learn it won a Razzie, and that is Rambo: First Blood Part 2. Of course, this film is very loved amongst my generation, especially people who loved it coming out after the sequel of First Blood. And so when I learned that this film had gotten a Worst Picture, it was kind of surprising to me because having seen this film, I mean, it's been a while though, but even to watch this film, it's made a very big impression on me, knowing that what Stallone is mainly known for is Rambo. Outside of Rocky, Rambo is the close second when it comes with what made Stallone's career. And even looking at this film alone, it's pretty much, it carries off from the previous one. It's not too hokey, it's not too, like, cringy of a film, and it doesn't play a lot of action tropes until it switches into the third act. But even this is a very straightforward film when you watch it. Maybe, you know, back then the 80s people had different tastes or so, but this was my pick.
And time. All right, bounce over to Tyler. 1 minute when you begin speaking.
All right, so I think everybody knows the grind. Everybody knows what it's like to keep working, trying to achieve your dreams, keeping your eye on the prize, you know, doing everything you can just to be able to get ahead, to get to your goals. No movie I've seen exemplifies that more than the movie Cocktail, which is my pick for best movie that has won a Worst Picture Golden Raspberry. Like Ryan said, I'm very surprised that this movie won that. Because I mean, I recently discovered this movie and it was a delight. I mean, it was very interesting. The story holds up really well over the years. It's just blows my mind that someone would think it's the worst when you think about the subject matter that it deals with. And maybe in the 80s they were more carefree and they didn't care about getting ahead. But today, in today's world, the idea of, okay, you need to keep working and you want to keep achieving these dreams. How are you going to do that? How are you going to get there? It's something that's prevalent in a lot of our society with side gigs and hustles and all that kind of stuff. So I think this movie really just, like, transcends the 80s.
And time. Bounce over to Ryan. 2 minutes when you begin speaking.
With Rambo: First Blood Part 2, I did say that it doesn't become full action until the latter third. It's mainly because in this movie, the movie is very straightforward. Rambo, he's in prison after the offense from the first one. He gets recruited by his former army captain to just do a reconnaissance mission, just plain and simple. But because of this film, this is also talking about during the time of the Vietnam War, which, just like with the previous First Blood film, this had a lot of social commentary, but also a lot of commentary pointed towards bureaucracy and military, because even then with Rambo's character, if people watch the film, I'm sorry if I'm spoiling this for you, he's sent on a mission to which he was never meant to succeed on. He goes into Vietnam, instead of doing his mission, he gets captured. he gets tortured, and of course, it's not until later on to where after the third half, right in the latter, he goes into revenge fuel, to where he goes after the bureaucrat that set him up. But even then, all this is about Rainbow going back to Vietnam, the place that caused him his PTSD, that made it traumatic for him. If you had taken away that, if you had just reduced the action of that last third, many people would have been saying this would have been exactly like First Blood. Less action there, more focused on the gritty realism that Stallone had brought in with Rambo's character. And despite so, it still boggles my mind how this was a worst picture pick, because when I did some research looking at some movies from that got released in 1985, there was at least 5 films I had written down that could have been put for worst picture. One of the Guys, A View to Kill, a James Bond film, Life Force, and oh my god, this is also the same year that had Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. I mean, at least any of those 5 films I just listed could have gotten the worst picture Razzie over Rambo First Blood Part 2. And that's my time.
All right. Bounce over to Tyler, his 2-minute rebuttal.
When I watched Cocktail, I found it to be a really fun film, which I think is something that we get a lot from a lot of 80s films. It's got vintage Tom Cruise doing the Tom Cruise thing of the 80s, just like Top Gun, just like every, a lot of other ones. You get to see him and he's cocky. He's very sure of himself. He's a little bit goofy. And you actually get to see him go through a journey I don't typically see in a lot of early Tom Cruise films. As he learns to date, as he learns his first taste of betrayal from someone that he trusts, how he deals with the fact, how he deals with his relationships, how does he deal with his failures. This movie is really about failure, which I think is something that resonates with a lot of us. I mean, I think we've all failed at some point in our lives. It really comes down to, are you going to run away from that failure, or are you going to keep moving forward? He failed when his best friend betrayed him, Doug, and he said, and he took that loss and he ran away, and he to Jamaica, and he just kind of lived a carefree life doing, exactly what Doug wanted him to do. And we see him as he learns to grow, as Doug comes back into his life and teaches him these lessons. And ultimately at the end, we see him learning to step up for his relationship, for his unborn child. He becomes a good friend with Doug, even though they had been betrayed. He had betrayed him before. He learns to forgive and he learns to forge ahead. And ultimately, after we see Doug's suicide, we and Brian get an understanding about where Brian's life was headed, because he was turning into another Doug in Jamaica. And that's why Doug was working so hard to make sure that he helped him and made him realize that he needs to become more, and that he believes in him becoming more. And I think that really, that kind of story really resonates. And it really just blows my mind that, as fun as a movie and as important a movie as this is, it got a Razzie.
And time. All right, 4-minute open debate when the first person begins speaking.
There was kind of a few more things I wanted to talk about with First Blood Part 2, mainly because this movie, looking at the difference between First Blood Part 2 and Cocktail is that, while both of them, they are definitely more loved now with later generations. I'd say if it came to a scale, First Blood Part 2 is definitely more loved on the pop culture circuit, because it inspired not only a lot of action films that came after it, but there are some films that actually took parts from First Blood Part 2 and kind of ran with it. So let's say, for example, the scenes where you got the big action guy gearing up, you got those close-up shots of them with their muscles and their gear, putting all that stuff together. That came from First Blood Part 2 when Rambo's gearing up to go on a mission. The torture scenes from where the protagonist breaks out, that's also from First Blood Part 2. Many other action films did that as well, but I'd say with most action films today, First Blood Part 2 is kind of one of the responsibilities for influencing them.
That is an interesting perspective, especially because there's so many things about the 80s in general that are taken from different movies. I don't know if just the way that something is shot and ability, you know, and I guess just like torture scenes and stuff really stands out to me as, oh man, when I see that, it's like, oh, First Blood Part 2, there it is. I saw it. Boom, there we go. So I'm not sure if that really resonates with me. I mean, I think we're kind of dealing with in different we're, you know, it's kind of different perspectives because for me, like watching Rambo First Blood Part 2, I just found it to be kind of just, you know, it's it's a, you know, an 80s fest. It's all about you know, we're gonna go to Vietnam, or we're gonna do this mission, and we're gonna fight, and we're gonna explode. And you know, it makes me think about, you know, Predator. You know, I saw, you know, a few years later, and how much I love that movie. And it kind of made me realize, like, all these other movies, like you said, movies that had done it, that had taken what First Blood Part 2 had and did it better, did it in a different way that was a little bit more resonating. And that really is what always stuck with me, is that I've seen this, and I'm, you know, I'm watching this, and this was my first time watching it. I was like, oh, I've seen this, but I've seen it differently, and I've seen it better. So it made it kind of hard for me to be as enjoy the film as much as I think that you did.
I mean, that's kind of fair. That's a kind of fair point to make. Though, regarding with Cocktail Tom Cruise, when you said earlier on with his character learning that hindsight's a failure, being cocky, coming off kind of, you know, like he's willing to take on everything. I could almost say the same thing when it comes with him with the when he's in The Color of Money. He's also a very young, cocky upstart as well, thinking he can take on everything, and then he gets betrayed, or he has to learn failure himself. I mean, The Color of Money, or even with my preferred favorite film of his, Days of Thunder, where instead of a cocktail bar, he's a NASCAR driver. He's cocky, he's upstart, and he's trying to take on everything. It felt like a similar thing that Tom Cruise, that he was really known for around that time. And so, personally, for me, Cocktail it's under a little bit under the bar, honestly, to where I will say maybe not the best film to win the worst Razzie, but something in the film to where I doesn't look, it would really strike a chord with me.
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, honestly, like, if we're just talking about Tom Cruise, maybe it's the same as everything else. But if we talk about, you know, Elizabeth Shue, we talk about Brian Brown as Doug Coughlin, we get to see the kind of supporting cast. We really start to see this movie kind of come together, because they're all influences on Brian, and it really shows to see as he continues his journey, and he kind of learns to grow up. And when he's isolated, he's always going to be that boyish charm.
And time. I hate when that happens.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to start with Ryan, his 1 minute closing when he stops coughing and begins speaking.
At its core, First Blood Part 2, it is a film talking about. It's pretty much a film continuing a story that Sylvester Stallone has said in interviews that he kind of didn't want to continue on. He wanted to do the original ending he had for First Blood Part 1, the original First Blood, to where Rambo's character died. But he did appreciate how in Part 2 he was able to at least tell more of a story of a soldier, at least getting a chance to make peace with some of the trauma that he had suffered. And you can definitely see that with Rambo in this one, even though he's forced to go back to Vietnam, but it's an opportunity for a second chance to save other prisoners of war. He ends up reconnecting with a lost love, of course, something that I had taken away from him, which turns him into a ruthless killing machine. But throughout that entire film, you get to see Rambo understand that there's more light within him than the horrors of war that he faced that was there from the previous film. So First Blood Part 2, it really didn't deserve that Razzie, but honestly, in the way you can contextualize it, it has. Oh no, time went out. Damn it.
Again, hate when that happens. And then last but not least, Tyler, when you've been speaking, close out this round.
Something that's interesting to me is that, and it made me think about it when Ryan was talking about all these other movies that came out in 1985. For me, it's what's the best film to have won a Worst Picture Golden Raspberry. It's a film that it's not who is it against. It's about how has it aged. And I think Cocktail has really aged really well, especially with, like I said, like the grind culture. We're all young, lost, trying to figure out how to make our way. And so we're also trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to move forward? How am I going to get to my goals? Everything like that. And you sometimes you have people that come into your life and they derail you. Sometimes you have people that come into your life and they may not be there at the right time. Some people will show you exactly how to reach your goals. This movie really exemplifies that. As we go through this, we see how Doug's journey ends, and then we get to see how Brian's journey ends, which is him getting to achieve his goals by borrowing money from his uncle, something he'd never done before. So I think that The Cocktail is just a movie that just really showed. Yeah.
And time.
All right, Henry. Thank you, guys. Thank you, competitors. I'm going to go ahead and put you in the back, as we will go ahead and turn it over to the judges for the decisions here. All right, and Jonathan, you are up first this time around, so I will turn it over to you as concise for me your vote and what was the mistake.
I would have given my point slightly to Ryan for Rambo First Blood Part 2. You point out some of the things that is sort of inspired by First Blood Part 2 and other films. Took some of it years later when it came out, and even put out some films came out around 1985. They should have put it there instead of First Blood Part 2. So I will give my point to Ryan for First Blood Part 2.
Okay, so the first vote goes to Ryan. Henry, down to you.
I think both of them canceled each other out with the influence and the different, tones that they were trying to go. Something Ryan said at the end of the 4-minute argument, talking about how Tom Cruise is kind of just doing Tom Cruise, bringing up The Color of Money, and how he said that Days of Thunder is a better example of that, really stuck with me. And I don't feel like Tyler was able to combat that enough. So I feel like that put him just over the edge for me. So I'm going to also go with Ryan.
All right, so the second point does go to Ryan there. Judges, thank you guys so much. I'll go ahead and put you in the back, and we'll go ahead and move on to question number 3. All right, and with question number 3, we're going to go ahead and move on to a topic that is more and more, I feel like, becoming prevalent in Hollywood, and that is the concept of kaijus. Obviously, over the 2010s, we had a couple of major franchises. Pacific Rim, Godzilla came back, that are promoting the kaiju. And I think that what people are looking for is, big monsters doing big things. But we also saw other films over the course of the 2000s and the 2010s take the concept of a kaiju and do something more creative with it and put it into a different lane than what we're used to. That's a really positive setup for a question that's actually very negative, because they've picked their answers for a reason. The question is, what is the most overrated film featuring a kaiju? And part of the reason that I phrased the setup for the question that way is to say both of these guys have picked unconventional choices, quote unquote, in that genre. So just keep in mind that you're not going to be getting the classic, big monsters arguments here. They're going to have something a little different to back it up, maybe, with that. But we are going to go ahead and jump into this. Tyler, you are back up first this time around, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you when you begin speaking, sir.
Yeah, so when I was thinking about like a most overrated film for kaiju films. Oh, I'm sorry. That was really off-putting with the shaking camera. My bad. When I was thinking about the most overrated film featuring kaiju, I chose the movie Cloverfield. So it's a found footage film about a kaiju. So they say. I found it to be overrated because everybody was really hyped on it. I remember when it was coming out, and other than the fact that like the shaking camera made people get motion sickness, I didn't really see a movie that justified its existence outside of using the novel found footage approach. It's a movie about a kaiju that we barely see, and that's usually, I'm not usually like big on that. Less is more sometimes is the best, but if it's going to be less, then we need to have more story. And the story of this guy trying to get across town to a girl we barely know that he claims to love, that he had a one-night stand with, it makes it really hard for me to buy into that when I just want to see people fighting, monsters fighting each other.
And shaking done. Bouncing over to Ryan, 60 seconds, your opening when you begin speaking.
I think one thing with kaiju films, or at least what we're seeing today with modern kaiju films, especially with the reboot of Godzilla franchise, is that we want more focus on the kaiju part of the story. As much as we understand the human aspect's going to be there, but it doesn't need to overtake the story. It doesn't need to constantly be the drive through for it, which is why my pick, Colossal, in my opinion, is kind of overrated though, because from the marketing, the trailer, and posters, it was all pointing this whole the connection between Anne Hathaway and a kaiju monster. And then once you get more into the film, guess what? Just turns out to be it's a struggle between alcoholism, uh, dredging up your past demons, going back home, trying to change who you are as a person. This stuff would have been great as a straight film, but honestly, the kaiju and is kind of the distraction point of it, and it really is kind of like you question why it's there in the first place.
And time, bouncing back over to Tyler.
Yeah, with Cloverfield, I think it's, for me, like I said, everybody was really hyped on it. They kept talking about it. It was really buzzing when it came out. When I watched it the first time, like I didn't particularly think that there was much that stood out about it other than the fact that it was the found footage. Crawling through, I mean, it was a very drab film, obviously, with going through New York, trying to, and it was just debris and everything. Not really much to it as far as like color goes. The cast, if I'm going to be honest with you, there wasn't a whole lot there. Which really is a bummer because, for me, like a kaiju film, sometimes, yeah, you want to, I'd like that human element to be likable. And it was hard for me to, even though they were saying all the right things, I just didn't find them to be really likable. And so that really, that really took away from it, especially, like I said, when you center a movie that's supposed to be, the marketing, I mean, the big marketing was the throwing of the Statue of Liberty head. And you're like, oh my God, that happened. That's crazy. And it happens in the first 15 minutes. And that's kind of like one of the biggest things that we see. It doesn't really like lend itself to creating this really interesting kaiju movie, because you're just like, okay, we're just wandering around New York. You take out the monster and you don't really have anything. It's the same exact movie pretty much, except for a bridge doesn't come down and the Statue of Liberty remains pristine. So it really makes it like overrated as far as like compared to other kaiju movies, especially in the few years that came out after that, even a few years before that. They just get to see these, kaiju. You get to see some, fighting. You get to see, which is always nice. But at the end of the day, it's just there isn't that much to it that makes it that interesting. There's nothing that really makes it groundbreaking, other than the fact that it's found footage, which at the time was really groundbreaking. I'm glad it's gone now. And honestly, like it kind of felt like 1995 or 1998's Godzilla again, with the same setting and the same kind of seeing the monster a little bit.
And time, ironically, I got to sneeze, so I'm going to hurry up and say, right, you're up.
To extend on my point, as I said from my opening, Colossal really could have worked on itself as a good drama, maybe an indie or a quirky indie film, because at the center of its core, it's Anne Hathaway's character, who's a writer, unfortunately suffering from alcoholism. She lost a relationship because of it, because of what's doing to her behavior. She goes back home, reconnects with an old buddy. You think that, okay, she's gonna maybe. You think you see the beats there, she's going to suffer a little bit, maybe start working, getting back on her feet again. But every now and then they throw in this whole thing with the kaiju, and all of a sudden you go, oh, it's not this little drama indie film. It's actually, it's going to be something weird, something different. Truth is, it's really distracting, though, because the only time it's ever interesting is when you see Anne Hathaway realize she has this connection with the kaiju, when it comes with her little quirks, when she likes to scratch the top of her head, when she's dancing around the playground, showing her friends the connection. And then they throw in this weird extra little quirk where her old friend, played by Jason Sudeikis, can also do the same thing as her, but instead of a kaiju, it's a robot. So it just goes more into weird territory. It's really not until they get to the middle to where it really delves into Anne Hathaway, which when actual film does, like really get to the point there to where it's only just about the suffering of alcoholism, what it does to you, how it affects everyone else around you. The only difference is that her alcoholism and his alcoholism just manifests itself into giant monsters that hurt people who honestly have nothing to do with those two. So, and honestly, if you look at it's just I'm about to jump into some race crap, and then I don't want to go there. But it's just this movie gives you more. To sum up that great line from Batman Forever, it raises too many questions. I don't need to know. I don't need to ask too many questions about this film to want to enjoy it. So all I wanted was just a straightforward story. Instead, it's throwing me out in so many different directions. I'm going to end my time.
And time. All right, 4-minute open debate when the first person begins speaking.
I found it really interesting that you seem to not agree with the concept. Agree with the concept of Colossal, because at the core of kaiju movies, for me at least, it's always been about the idea of wish fulfillment, and that's really what Colossal means a lot to me. Because I mean, she's wishing to get away from her problems. She's wishing to get away from her abusers, because that's, say Jason Sudeikis, he's her abuser. You see it throughout the movie, and I think at the core of it, that's what that movie had become. I know at the beginning it seemed like it was about alcoholism, but I think as it moved on, it was about abuse and how she had suffered this abuse at the beginning when the monster first appeared. So kind of like
that really would have been, and I really would have enjoyed, and I really would have enjoyed that more if they really weren't trying to use this symbolism of the kaiju there. I mean, it would have been better if it was just if you remove the kaiju, the robot, and Korea out and Seoul, Korea out there, and focused more on her alcoholism just affecting everyone in the town, which is where she grew up from. That would have been a more focused story, especially when it turns on to where you discover where her, well, even though in the movie it reveals the trauma, the creation of all this was because it happened some crap when they were kids. But even then, it was kind of like, it felt like another twist that did not need to be added, honestly.
I mean, I think there's always going to, with kaiju movies, there's always going to be leaps of logic. You're never going to be able to understand 100%. I mean, sometimes they'll throw in the radiation, they'll throw in aliens, whatever. But at the end of the day, half the time we don't really know where these kaiju come from, and we don't really care. I think it was an interesting move to include how this area, this park, had become the site of one of the first abuses that Anne Hathaway's character had gone through, and how that linked her to the monster, and how her going to Korea was her taking back control of her life, which is something that she had not gotten to do the entire time. So I think the kaiju concept was something that really made this movie kind of stand on its own, something that you don't see as often, and it made it a little bit more, it made it more fun, which I think makes it more relatable for people who may have a harder time digesting films that are just straight, this is alcoholism and how it destroys lives.
Yeah. No, that is a point there, but I'm saying, but even then, like, yeah, her going to Korea, I get that. It's part of her taking the power back, but she still could have had that moment, especially when her ex-boyfriend comes back wanting to reconnect. She still could have left town, not reconnect. I mean, she still doesn't get back with him, but you can still have the same having that you. With Cloverfield, I understand some of your things with the shaky cam and the whole point of the monster there, but the whole point of this Cloverfield that you're seeing everything from the ground level, from normal people who's experiencing this massive attack that's happening. And the shaking cam, you can actually justify it because these are people who are just terrified and they're just trying to get from one place to another to remain safe, but they can never remain safe there. And as you said earlier about that, our main character trying to reconnect with a girlfriend, at the point that the world, if you think the world around you is going to be ending, don't you want to go to somebody that you had a connection with to at least want to, if things are going to end, you at least want to be at peace. That's one thing the human element I can get from Cloverfield.
I mean, I don't know. For me personally, I'd want to get off the island, but that's just me.
I know they're still thinking of getting off that island, but you can even understand too, like somebody that even if they think they can't get out, they still want to find that one person that they want to make sure they're safe, because sometimes one of our greatest flaws is sometimes we'll put our own feelings or the person we love above rational thought.
And time. All right, Tyler, 1 minute when you begin speaking.
Like I said before with Cloverfield, I mean, there's not really anything there that is groundbreaking. It's kind of a bait and switch. You expect there to be a lot of monster. There's not a lot of monster. You expect there to be humans that you're like, okay, I want to continue on this journey with. There's not really that. I mean, they had just the idea of you going and trying to save somebody that you love is all well and good, but there was never really established that they loved each other than the fact that they had some inner cuts of them at Coney Island and him saying, I really care about her, but they just got into an argument because he had pretty much ghosted her after she and him slept together. There's just not much there. I think the trailer really let us down with the giant statue of Liberty Head. I think it really set up this expectation that you're going to have this epic monster, and then we don't see it. It just kind of runs around, messes with them a little bit, just to kind of spook them, and then it'll move on until it decided it wants to kill them.
And time. Ryan, close out this round when you're speaking.
My opponent did bring up some good points about Colossal and the fact that, it's about how the monster, how Anne Hathaway and her childhood trauma does link to the monster itself. But to me, as I mentioned before, it feels like it was just one of those those plot reveals, those little twists that the writers and the director brought into the story that just raised too many questions. Because then you start asking yourself, how does a lightning storm end up connecting a monster or robot to these two people? Because then you guys start questioning the coincidence there. Yeah, sure, the playground, a great source of the abuse and the trauma that affects her character's alcoholism moving forward. Great, you can still do that in a straightforward film. But to me, as I said earlier on, this is Colossal is a film, unfortunately, to where when it comes with kaiju films, the kaiju honestly is just in the background, and it's only brought out to push the narrative forward. It's not there to be a part of the narrative. It's just there to more. Oh, we need an excuse. We need a question to answer.
Kaiju. And time. All right.
Competitors, thank you guys so much. I'll go ahead and put you in the back and bring the judges in for the deliberation. And Henry, I won't cut you off this time because it's your time to judge. Oh, that said, who's
so I'm not sure whose strength this was, and this might not have been a strength. I don't know. I mean, I'm used to championship matches where every question's a strength, but I don't know if this is a strength or whatever. But Tyler did a great job of just research, so whether it was a strength or just he did a great job of research. Ryan, if Tyler didn't set up what he said earlier about all the stuff in these movies is like set up to be fantasy and metaphorical and all that stuff, then maybe Ryan's closing would have hit harder, but I feel like Tyler set that up really well. And Ryan's knock on this movie is the metaphor stuff, and then Tyler hit it where that metaphor is the best part of it. So and not really enough defenses towards Cloverfield, so I'm going with Tyler.
Okay, Carrie, down to you.
Your lag is tweaking me out. I'm sorry.
I'm also going to go with Tyler on this one. I just thought Tyler had the slightly better argument about how Cloverfield was kind of overhyped, but from Tyler's argument, it just sounded like a very boring movie that didn't really have much plot or story and not enough kaiju in it. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, judges. I'm going to go ahead and put you in the back, and we will go ahead on to question number 4 here. And question number 4, excuse me, is something that will be, you guys will be seeing a variation of this question recurrently. So in the off season, as you guys know, I have a team of people who I'll speak to and bounce ideas off of. And one of those guys, Noah McCausland, submitted a concept. He was like a concept for a question. Now, I'm sure somebody else has mentioned this at some point, and obviously it's a great idea. So if you did, and I'm not crediting you as well, I apologize, but it was most recently I heard it from him and I liked it, so I kept it. So we're going to be slowly but surely through these matches, going through the decades and asking the question, what is the best year in film of a particular decade? And specifically with this one, we are starting with the 1960s. What is the best year in film of the 1960s? 10 to choose from. We have two of them here. Brian, you are up first, sir. So when the chug is finished, time starts when you begin speaking.
Took me a while to unmute this. Okay. I will admit that this was one. This is definitely a good one here because there's always a certain film that I like to identify to that I love the most. But when it came down to it, looking at the year, I went with the year that I thought gave me better quality films that I personally enjoyed and definitely would recommend people, and definitely films I now recommend people to watch. And that year is 1963. Now, the year itself may not be it's not going to probably be as any different as any other year in the 60s. But one thing in 1963 was that it did have some good films that did come up, and that is The Great Escape. It's a mad, 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 mad world. It had Lord of the Flies, I believe the black and white version. And of course, it had the Jerry Lewis Nutty Professor, which, of course, as a fan of Eddie Murphy, it got remixed into the Eddie Murphy version later on. So I never would have known about the Nutty Professor ones for this, but there's a lot more films I can definitely list down on here. But as I want to reiterate earlier, there's some good quality films.
And time. All right, Tyler, 1 minute when you've been speaking.
This is an interesting challenge going so far back. Obviously, I don't remember the 60s. I wasn't there. So trying to figure out which year was the best. I had to think about my knowledge today. And what I went with is 1968. So this year is probably one of the most pivotal years as far as movie history in general goes. It's not just for the 60s. I would say it's for all time. It gave us greats like the original Planet of the Apes, 2001: A Space Odyssey. It gave us Night of the Living Dead, which it pretty much created a whole genre. We created subgenres with yours, mine, and ours, the concept of the blended family. The Odd Couple, which you've seen many, many times since then. Rosemary's Baby. I could go on and on, but this year held so many different genre-defining movies that it had to be the choice for the 60s.
And time. All right, we're going to bounce over to Ryan. 2 minutes when you begin speaking.
Now, I don't want to keep making this a list of films that came out there because this would be a pointless argument. But as I do want to reiterate, I do want to say there are some good quality films. Now, with Lord of the Flies, this, of course, is based off of a book. But for me personally, I would not have understood the impact of that book if it wasn't for the film that was shown to me. And seeing of that film, Lord of the Flies, of kids, unfortunately, being crashed on island. These are really like school kids. They're proper, they're civil, and then all of a sudden, left with no resources on their hands, you see their slow descent into savagery, which is it's a hard tale. It's a hard look at in the film, and the black and white color there. It actually, I think, it really helps accentuate in that film. Now, of course, moving on from Lord of the Flies, there's also another film in black and white that came out in 1963, and it's a horror film, The Haunting, a very excellent film itself. Really does a good job of dancing between the line of supernatural and then of reality, where the premise is there's a doctor who invites people who can't sleep, but he tells them straight up front that, well, we're investigating ghosts. So it really does a good job of really dancing the narrative on these people who are here for a psychiatric test, and all of a sudden going to like, wait, what am I experiencing is real or not? But I could keep going on and on talking about The Haunting. But there are these two films that I definitely enjoyed from 1963 that I think that I would recommend to people always. And that is Charade, starring R.G. Hepburn and Cary Grant, and The Birds, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. These are two great thrillers that came out in 1963. They are beloved amongst many cinephiles and film and movie fans, and they're definitely two films I will push amongst the other people to watch because it's great acting performances, great use of camera work, and of course because these are 60s. These are and the costumes in both of these films, they are fantastic. And I'm just gonna end it right there.
Fantastic acting from Ryan there. Just flowed with the edit. Perfect for the behind the scenes stuff. You never would have known there was a cut there. I can't remember if we're is it the 4 minute or was that just the opening? That was just the
Tyler's on his 2 minutes.
Okay, so now we're going over to Tyler for his 2 minutes. Behind the scenes, you guys don't need to know our business. Tyler, when you've been speaking.
Yeah, so for me, obviously with the 60s, like I said, I wasn't there. I didn't get up every Friday and go see a movie during the 60s. So I was trying to think of, for me, I really want to think about what movies really left their mark. And so that's why I chose 1968, like I said. It created genres. It created there was probably one or two examples before, but it created the zombie subgenre of horror, which is one of my favorites. It created Yours, Mine, and Ours, The Blended Family, that kind of thing. Subgenres that have persisted since then. Not only as the movies that have inspired them, but also just those genres have grown since then. I also think it was a really well-rounded year as far as great movies that came out. Like I said, sci-fi, Planet of the Apes, 2001: Space Odyssey. Some comedies, The Odd Couple. Family movies, The Love Bug, if you like Herbie. Horror, Night of the Living Dead. Action, Bullet with Steve McQueen. Even in musicals, with Funny Girl and Yellow Submarine. There was a lot that 1968 offers people that we're familiar with today. And also, we talked about previously in this, is that where we see the homages, where we see the same themes, the same ideas. When I think about movies that have I've seen multiple times be shown in other movies, TV shows, whatever, I think about the end of Planet of the Apes, where it turned out that George Taylor was on a future Earth. And he saw the Statue of Liberty, and he blew it up. I remember vividly seeing that, in Futurama, things like that. Also, Night of the Living Dead. Just that story. We've seen that story so many times at the farmhouse. In a lot of different zombie media. So it's something that there's a little bit of something for everybody in 1968, and it's not only great, but it's for everybody. I said that twice.
Well, yeah, you're gonna have 4 more minutes to say it more times if you want. When the first person begins speaking.
I do have one slight counter to some cultural stuff that you that from somewhere in the 1968. There were also some cultural stuff that's being referenced even today. Maybe people were cartoon fans of SpongeBob SquarePants, the episode where him and Patrick listen to obey a magic conch. I would not have at least done the full tugging of strings if I didn't realize that's kind of a reference to Lord of the Flies, and also The Night Professor, to where someone drinks a potion and they turn into something. Sure, it's a Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing, but Night Professor is kind of one of those films that really just made it all fun and comedy kind of sort of instances. And then if we want to talk about stuff that's cultural, the Pink Panther, the film Inspector Clouseau, Peter Sellers, the first film came out in 1963, which really, the bumbling detective trope, which became very popular throughout so many other comedy films and even TV shows with TV detectives like Monk. Oh my God, I'm forgetting. I'm not going to stumble my words here because I'm brain fog. But even then, there's a lot of stuff early on in 1963 that had a lot of good cultural tropes that's being felt today and that inspired so many people.
I think it's
Columbo. Jesus Christ. Sorry.
There are definitely influences from a lot of movies, but I just think that 1968 takes cake. I think there's a lot more opportunities, a lot more homages. I think what's really telling too is that these movies are almost 55 years old now this year. So that's a long time. A lot of people don't usually watch movies that are earlier than when Star Wars came out. So the fact that they talk about all these different movies that are from that time, and how many times that we've seen people try to recreate them, and they just haven't been able to quite catch that magic. I mean, Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes, usually not really liked, but people talk about the 1968 Planet of the Apes, even though, the mouths don't move right. Same with Night of the Living Dead. We've seen people try to remake that, but it's just you can't touch those classics. And you said yourself, like with the Nutty Professor, Eddie Murphy, that was really near and dear to your heart. I don't know that many people that talk about the original Nutty Professor. I usually hear them talk about the remake, so it makes it harder for me to think about that being a cultural impact when the remake is something that sticks in people's mind more.
I'll give you one remake that's not really sticking in a lot of people's minds. The most recent Godzilla vs. Kong. Of course, obviously, it's a build-up, but there was already the original Godzilla vs. King Kong, and that was in 1963. Now, that may not have been as spectacle as the one that we got, but I kind of like that original one because it was more focused on the creatures fighting than on the human subplot that we got in that film. And then with what you're saying about films that also, there was also another remake that was made in the 90s, The Haunting of Hill House. There was also a Haunting remake starring Liam Neeson, which was terrible and definitely does not stand up to the original that was released in 1963. And talking about other remakes, Steve Martin's Pink Panther, sure, he got a sequel, but let's be honest, everyone knew that he was trying to imitate Peter Sellers, trying to be bumbling, trying to do a French accent when he really could not hold a candle to him.
I guess, I mean, when I think about those movies that you mentioned, I don't really think about them a lot, if I'm going to be honest with you. The Pink Panther, I mean, I know it was like for a blip there. People were really excited about it because of Steve Martin doing Steve Martin things. But I mean, it didn't really persist, the Pink Panthers. And so but when I think about movies that persist.
There were sequels and sequels of the Pink Panther before the remake though, but go ahead.
But when I think about movies that persist, there's always those mainstays: Night of the Living Dead, 2001: Space Odyssey, Planet of the Apes. These movies.
I mean, there is another mainstay in the James Bond franchise. From Russia with Love came out in 1963, and it's definitely one film that still is a mainstay of that franchise.
And Time, franchise, strike it from the record. We're going to start with Ryan, his 1 minute closing when he stops coughing and begins speaking. He's getting real Night of the Living Dead on us. Sorry, I had to throw it out there.
Now this subject here of the year film, this is definitely, I will be honest, a very subjective one between myself and Tyler. Like, we both have movies that we chose for different reasons, the years for different reasons. I did say I picked this one because it has some good quality films that I like to watch, and I would recommend other people to watch who are new to movies, as I mentioned with Charade and The Birds. And even then, 1963 also has films that if you're not much of a big horror fan, I will recommend The Haunting, just to slowly introduce you in. If you're a musical fan, there's Bye Bye Birdie, which was there. Or if you're someone that likes watching like Hollywood, trying to see what Hollywood can do with big spectacle films, there's Cleopatra. I mean, that movie alone, if you're in film studies and you just look at that movie and then you do the research on that going on in, you see how much Hollywood tried to make this movie a big deal. Even though it was #1 at the box office, it's still recognized as more of a Hollywood passion project. Like, there's so much variety in 1963 here that I would still want to, at least worth exploring.
Strike it from the record. 1 minute closing. Tyler, when you get him speaking.
Like Ryan said, it's going to be subjective between me and him. I don't have the experience that he does with 60s movies. I mainly came into it late. And so for me, what it came down to was, what year was one that defined the decade and also could define further? 1968, I believe, does that. Like I said, I'm not going to keep saying it again. We had new genres created that are still around today. We had, movies that have stood the test of time over 55 years, that have not quite even been replicated, even by the people that created them. That's how timeless they are. I'm also going to, for the first time ever, throw in some actual statistic data. There are 12 1963 movies that are in the National Film Registry, but there are 17 1968 in the National Film Registry. So I think that speaks to itself about how how pivotal that year was and what it brought to. Even if I could count how many times I saw Family Guy, Simpsons, all that, all the different times that they referenced 1968 movies, I mean, the list would be,
Striker from the record. All right, that is time. We're going to go over to the judges. And, Aaron didn't cut me off that time.
I can play nice. You're helping me out. Kick you to the back to reorder it correctly. All right. With that said, we're going to go to Carrie first. Who gets your vote and what was the main selling point?
Both really interesting choices and really interesting movies that the competitors brought up. I'm going to give my vote slightly to Tyler just because I think he made the best points about how 1968 movies created entire subgenres and seemed to define the decade. And it didn't seem like Ryan was really able to rebut those points.
And then go down to Jonathan for your vote.
Both of the argument, he's kind of representing the question for me, is tied with 1968 because you point out the sort of like more on the cultural impact around the film surrounded in 1968. While Ryan didn't feel like it was a little bit more for his year, I didn't hear sort of enough of his to barely take it on top with Tyler for 1968. So I will get my point to Tyler.
All right. So with that, judges, thank you guys so much. I'm going to go ahead and put all of you in the back. An extra special thanks to Henry, man. Thanks for helping out. But that, because our winner by a final score of 3-1, it is Tyler Burch pulling out the win tonight. Tyler, congratulations. You are now 3-2. On the positive side of the records. You're also on a 2-win streak. How are you feeling coming out of this?
Feeling pretty good, not gonna lie. Like I said, this one was really challenging. It was a lot of movies that I hadn't really seen before. And so and I think that really showed with a couple of the questions, I definitely was just kind of dealing with what I got because I was like, oh yeah, I'll take I'll take Tony Scott because I know these movies, and then I was looking into it, I was like, oh well, there may not have been as much going on there as I thought there was, so I had to work with what I got. I felt like I really rambled, so I think that shows that.
Yeah, and so obviously with the 2-win streak now, putting together a win streak is something that even the best of players find really difficult to do. You have to really get on a good run there. So even with 2 wins in a row now, the next time that we have you back, it means that you'll start to sort of, with another win, find yourself on the outside of that title picture, which will mean bigger players and sort of a bigger step up. Is that something that sort of concerns you since it's been a bit since you played a bigger player like that, or do you just kind of take everything one step at a time and see what happens?
I take it one step at a time. I'm not too concerned. I mean, obviously, there's people out there that they just steamroll and they just keep going, and they'll push and they'll push and they'll push, and so that always kind of worries me a little bit because I like to keep it nice and friendly. But I mean, I'll try to answer I'm here to talk about movies and try to have some fun with it and kind of come up with different ideas. So that's what I'm gonna do with everybody that I go against, regardless if they're heavyweights or lightweights.
Absolutely. Well, you did a great job with that tonight. Some really good answers and good debating. Congratulations on the victory, and we will see you next time you are back as we go ahead and put you in the back and bring in your opponent. And Ryan, as someone myself who is recovering a little bit from being under the weather, I always appreciate when someone is willing, when they're at a place where they're like, okay, I can still do this and fight through, because things happen. Things get canceled all the time, so I always appreciate when people do show up and play. Did not go your way tonight, but is there anything that you can take from this and feel good about?
Well, I mean, pretty much like my previous matches, it's all about just focusing my argument. I really thought with my choices here, I thought I had some good picks, especially going through my head, the logic is sound. I just need to focus more on really practicing, really getting my arguments down, not just having a whole list of flashcards to help focus me on a point, because depending on the timer, I might just start rambling, or on a debate with the little debate portion, it's kind of be like, okay, I gotta focus on how I can get there. It's gonna next match happens, more focus on just listening and fine tuning what I gotta say. Either way,
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. The first step to succeeding is just always nailing the basics. And despite the fact that you've been, in terms of time period, because you've had a little bit more time between each match, you've been debating for a bit now, you're still, compared to some of the number of matches that other players have played, a rookie in that sense, and you're still sort of getting into it. So it's always good to have you back, sir. Always appreciate having you. Another one, you bring some good arguments there, especially that last one from both of you was really well done in terms of, it's a lot to try and synthesize 1 year into a couple minute arguments. I think you guys did a great job with that one in particular. But we will see you next time you are back, sir. Take care. Until then.
Thank you.
As we go ahead, what's that? Always attractive, right? Go ahead and wrap this up. Tyler pulling out a very solid victory today, putting himself, again, continuing on that positive path. I always thought from the jump that Tyler looked good as a debater. The one thing that he says he thinks of is the one thing I appreciate, the unique approach, perspective, and answering and how he's approaching things. And I think, he had a couple of stumbles there back to back, but he sort of finally finding how to work that into also winning the debates, and a solid effort from Ryan nonetheless as well, with some good choices and arguments there. It just can't always go your way, and tonight, unfortunately, it did not go his. I want to give a big shout out to our judges. Thank you to Jonathan and Carrie, and of course to Henry for being here and helping as well in the intermediary in the rounds. I do really appreciate having help. Again, congratulations to Tyler on the win. Shout out to Ryan for a good performance. Please be sure to rate the video, comment, subscribe, and stick around, because every single week we have multiple Movie Battleground matches coming at you. We have a lot of fun, and we have some great discussion in these videos, so be sure to stick around and check them out. But with all that said, guys, my name is Aaron Knoll, and we will see you next time on Movie Battleground. Take care, everybody.